What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Bible Vlog. Today we pick it back up in chapter 23 of the book of Acts. Now, where we left off yesterday is that Paul has been accused of teaching against the law of Moses, which is basically held sacred by the Jewish people. He's put into a Roman barracks, which is almost a type of jail, but more than anything, it's really for Paul's own safety, as many of the religious leaders and some of the Jewish people are trying to kill him. Now, we're picking the story up the following morning, and it says that Paul has been released from the barracks, and the Roman garrison who's been watching over him brings him before the religious council and the chief priests. So starting in verse 1, Paul addresses them and says, "Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day." Now look at what happens in verse 2. "And the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth." Now Paul gets upset at this. Look at verse 3. "Then Paul said to him, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall, for you sit to judge me according to the law, and do you command me to be struck contrary to the law?" You see, what has just happened is the high priest has actually broken the law by hitting Paul, and Paul knows this and is pointing out the hypocrisy of what this guy just did. Then in verse 4, "And those who stood by said, do you revile God's high priest?" Now look at Paul's reaction in verse 5. "Then Paul said, I did not know, brethren, that he was the high priest. For it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people." You see, Paul hasn't been convicted of anything yet, and for him to be struck when he hasn't even been accused was actually illegal according to their law. So Paul's reaction here is totally justified, but you know what's amazing to see? Even though Paul is completely innocent of all of the charges that these religious leaders are trying to bring against him, and he's literally just been punched in the mouth by these guys, he still shows obedience to what the Bible teaches about respecting authority. You know, I'll just be honest, this would be really hard for me to do. My natural reaction would be to fight back in this situation, but Paul places such an emphasis on God's word that he obeys it in spite of everything that he's feeling inside that's making him want to lash out. Now in verse 6, we actually see the wisdom of Paul in this situation, and here's what happens. He knows that everyone here at this meeting is against him, so he gets them to turn on each other instead of focusing on him. Now listen to this. "But when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, concerning the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am being judged. And when he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the whole assembly was divided." You see, the Sadducees held vastly different views than the Pharisees on some of these issues. In fact, the Jewish historian Josephus confirmed in his writings that the Sadducees denied things like the resurrection, the immortality of the soul, eternal rewards, and the world to come. So this was a big issue between these two groups, and the Pharisees and Sadducees start fighting over this issue with Paul. So in verse 9 it says, "Then there arose a loud outcry, and the scribes of the Pharisees' party arose and protested, saying, We find no evil in this man. But if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God." So this is turning into a situation where some of the leaders of the group actually start saying, Paul must know what he's talking about because he agrees with our theology. And now not only are they arguing with each other, but now they're arguing over what to do with Paul. So the commander of this Roman garrison sees that things are starting to get out of hand, and he puts Paul back into the barracks. So while the crowd calms down and Paul's put back into the barracks, it says that there's a crowd of about 40 Jewish guys who make an oath with themselves saying that they will neither eat nor drink anything until they have killed Paul. So they're trying to set up one more meeting with Paul and the religious leaders so that they can attack him by surprise and kill him. Well, in verse 16, it actually says that Paul has a nephew in Jerusalem who finds out about this plan, and he goes and tells Paul about what is going to happen. Paul has his nephew actually go and tell the commander of the Roman garrison about this plan, and they secretly move Paul in the middle of the night to Caesarea. Now it says that 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen actually escort Paul on this journey. So what was awaiting in Caesarea? Paul is actually being brought before a governor named Felix. You see, God is setting Paul up over and over again to testify about Jesus to some of the highest leadership in the world at this time. And if there's one thing we know about Paul, it's that he'll never back down from preaching Jesus to anyone. Guys, that is it for us today with Acts 23. I will say this, as we continue to read through the life of Paul and his incredible bravery for always preaching Jesus, it's a reminder to me to live my life like that, to never be ashamed of my faith or the fact that I'm a Christian. Certainly many of us will never face the type of persecution that we read about Paul facing, but it should always serve as a reminder to us of the true cost of following Jesus. He is worth it. He is worth all of it. Love you guys. I hope you have a very beautiful day. We will see you back here tomorrow for Acts 24. We'll see you guys.